In Module 1, we're going to introduce digital forensics and look at what digital forensics investigators actually do. So digital forensics has changed considerably over the past years. It was originally focused heavily on securing and analyzing information that was stored on the computer for criminal, civil, or administrative cases. Today, that field also includes areas such as incident response, research, and e-discovery. So this slide here is going to give us an overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to define digital forensics, compare the public and private sector investigations. We're going to discuss professional conduct, look at how an investigation should be organized. We're also going to look at several types of private sector investigations. Towards the end of the chapter, we'll walk through some of the basic process of conducting an investigation, from gathering the evidence through analyzing it and completing the case. So digital forensics combines computer science with investigation process. The key word here is evidence. Now, we're not going to simply try to recover information from a computer. We need to properly acquire the information, preserve it, analyze it, document what we did, and be able to repeat our results. Now, with digital forensics, your standard procedures, these are something that are important because this digital evidence may eventually be used in court or another formal proceeding. Now, the federal rule of evidence, this helps establish consistency concerning evidence used in federal proceedings. It was signed into a law in 1973, and many states, their rules will map to it. Now, the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects everyone's right to be secure from search and seizure. So you may need a separate search warrants. You may not need those separate search warrants. It's just going to depend on the case, and that might not be necessary for digital evidence. Now, one thing you'll see throughout this course is that having the technical ability to access information doesn't automatically mean you'll have the legal authority to access it. So digital investigators need to understand both technology and the rules governing that investigation. Now, digital forensics, this involves securely collecting the information, examining it, determining where it came from, and potentially presenting the findings. This is different from data recovery. So with data recovery, we usually know what we're trying to recover. Someone might say, I accidentally deleted this file. Can you get it back? With digital forensics, we may not know exactly what we're looking for. So we're investigating and looking for the evidence related to the incident. So we see here the digital forensics, the investigation triad. This is where forensic investigators often work as part of a team known as the investigative triad. So they may work with other security network or investigative professionals. And this is important because modern investigations can involve computers, servers, networks, mobile devices, maybe cloud servers, other technologies. And one person is not necessarily going to know and be an expert in everything. So it's important to work together in a team. Now, a couple of definitions you'll need to know is vulnerability and threat assessments. This looks for the weaknesses in the systems. The risk management tests, so they verify the integrity of the standalone workstations and network servers. Network intrusion detection and incident response focus on detecting and responding to the attacks. And digital investigations focus on systems that contain evidence related to an investigation or an incident or crime. Now, some of these areas overlap, which is why investigators benefit from having knowledge of networking, security, operating systems, and other areas of IT. So digital forensics tools have developed along with computer technology. By the early 1990s, organizations were already developing specialized training and software for computer investigations. Today, investigators have many commercial and open source forensic tools available. The important point isn't memorizing every product that's on this slide. Technology changes quickly, so a successful investigator needs to be able to keep learning as many new operating systems, devices, applications, and forensics tools as they appear. Now, technology often changes faster than laws can be written. So, when there isn't a statute that directly addresses a situation, courts may look at previous court decisions involving similar situations. That's where the case law becomes important. For digital forensic investigators, this means staying informed about court decisions involving electronic evidence, privacy, search, and seizure. Again, just because something is technically possible doesn't necessarily mean it's legally permitted. As we've stated, that no investigator knows everything. So you should be familiar with multiple operating systems, Windows, Linux, Mac OS. Um, you should also build relationships with other professionals. If you're investigating something outside your area of expertise, you may need assistance from a network specialist, maybe an operating system specialist, another security professional, or another forensic investigator. So knowing who to ask can sometimes be just as important as knowing the answer yourself. So be sure to consult outside experts as needed. So we can divide the most digital investigations into two broad categories. You're going to have the public sector investigations and private sector investigations. Public sector investigations generally involve government agencies and criminal investigations, while the private sector investigations generally involve businesses, organizations, the companies, um, the policies written by those companies, or civil matters. Now, the procedures and the legal authorities, they can be different depending on what type of investigation you're conducting. Public sector investigations, the investigators, these need to understand criminal law and proper legal proceedings. That's going to include also the search and seizure rules and how evidence is gathered to build a criminal case. Now, this criminal investigation often begins when someone reports or witnesses a possible crime, or they find evidence of the crime. And from that point forward, the investigators must follow the proper procedures, because if you improperly collect evidence, that can create problems later in the case. It may be not admissible in court. Um, Judge may throw it out. So you want to make sure that you follow the proper procedures when collecting data. Now, the digital forensic first responder, this is the person that arrives on the incident scene, assesses the situation, and takes precautions to acquire and preserve the evidence. The digital evidence specialist, that's the person that has the specialized skills to analyze the data and determine whether another specialist should be called in to assist. You may also encounter affidavits. That's a sworn statement that's used to support facts or evidence related to the investigation. Now, this must include exhibits that support that allegation. Now, private sector investigators, these investigations occur within business and organizations. These investigations can include policy violations, wrongful termination cases, harassment, discrimination, fraud, sabotage, embezzlement, industrial espionage. This is something that's not necessarily going to be a criminal investigation. Sometimes it's simply determining whether an employee violated a company policy. Now, companies should have a clear policies explaining how employees are allowed to use their company computers and networks. This should be the acceptable use policy. Organizations should also establish a line of authority identifying who can authorize an investigation and who can access evidence. Now, when they have these clear policies, this makes investigations much easier because employees know what is and what isn't permitted. Um, an example of this is a warning banner. So you've probably seen something similar to this when you log in to your school, business, government computer. It's the terms of service, the user use agreement. So this message here tells you user the computer belongs to the organization, explains the conditions in which the system can be used. Organizations should also designate an authorized requester. That's who has the power to initiate investigations. Some common private sector investigations include misuse of company computers, email abuse, and internet abuse. So, an important difference in business environment is that the company still has to operate. An investigation should minimize the unnecessary disruption and risk to the organization. Now, when you're talking about BYODs, the bring your own devices, this creates additional challenges. This is where employees can use their personal devices, whether it's a phone, tablet, laptops on the company network. So, one of the important questions that's raised with this, um, where does personal property end and company authority begin? So, organization needs policies that clearly explain what happens when personal devices connect to the company resources. Now, as you see on the screen, it does that some companies now state that you can connect your personal device to a business network. It falls under the same rules as the company policy, as the company property. Digital forensic investigators, they have access to information that may be extremely private or sensitive. So professional conduct means maintaining the objectivity, confidentiality, the ethics, and integrity. Your personal opinion about the person you're investigating should determine the conclusions. The evidence should determine your conclusions. So the investigators need to continue education because hardware, software, networking, and forensic tools are constantly changing. It's important to keep up to date and aware of the latest changes in the profession. Now, the role of a digital forensic professional is to gather the evidence to prove that a suspect committed a crime or violated company policy. So, one of the most important concepts is the chain of custody. The chain of custody documents what happens to evidence from the time it's collected until the investigation ends and the evidence goes to court. So, we need to know who had the evidence, when they had it, where it was stored, and what was done with it. So, this diagram here is going to show us the 5 basic steps of an investigation. First, you form a hypothesis about what happened. Second, you identify where evidence might exist. Third, collect and extract the evidence. Then you ask, when you're analyzing the evidence, you want to determine whether it supports or disputes your hypothesis. Okay, so if it does not support your original hypothesis, you start over again. You form another conclusion, form another hypothesis, another theory about what's happening, and go back through the steps. Now, if it did support your original hypothesis, you create or present your final report. Uh, Now, keep in mind that when you're doing an investigation, you're not starting by randomly searching a computer. So you have to have a reason for the investigation. So now we're going to look at the overview of a computer crime. Once again, computers contain evidence to help establish the sequence of events surrounding a crime. They may contain documents, messages, deleted files, internet activity, or other information. Before beginning the actual examination, investigators should assess the situation and identify possible challenges. Then they can begin acquiring and analyzing data using the appropriate forensic tools. Now, a good investigation follows a plan. We begin by assessing the case, determining our approach, creating a checklist, identifying the resources, obtaining the evidence, and identifying risks. Then we work to reduce those risks, test our approach, analyze the evidence, complete the report, and critique the case. So it's very important to work systematically rather than randomly. Uh, Follow these steps of taking a systematic approach into your investigation. Now, before beginning, you want to make sure you determine exactly what kind of case we're dealing with. So you assess the case by outlining the case details. What is the situation? What type of evidence may exist? Where is that evidence located? What kind of storage device or file system are we dealing with? So answering these questions help us determine what equipment, software, personnel, and time we'll need. So once we have our plan, we acquire the evidence and begin documenting it. So in this, we acquire the evidence, complete the evidence form, and establish that chain of custody. We then want to transport that evidence to a computer forensics lab. You want to secure evidence in a approved, secure container. Prepare your forensic workstation, and then retrieve the evidence from the secure container. You also want to make a forensic copy of the evidence. Once you do that, you want to return the original evidence to that secure container. You don't want to work on your original evidence. Okay, so you always make a copy, work from that whenever possible. So this protects the original evidence. And you need to process the copied evidence with computer forensics tools. So we see an example here of a multi-evidence form. The documentation may not seem as exciting as recovering the deleted files, but it is one of the most important parts of an investigation. If you can't document where the evidence came from or how it was handled, it will create questions about the reliability of your investigation. So your physical evidence also needs protection. This may mean evidence bags, anti-static material, padded containers, and evidence tape. Digital evidence is still physical property when we're dealing with hard drives, computers, phones, flash drives, and other devices. So we have to protect those devices from damage and unauthorized access. So employee termination cases, these often involve misuse of company resources. So examples can include inappropriate computer use or inappropriate emails. So before investigating, the organization should already have those policies defining the acceptable behavior in place. The investigators should also work with appropriate departments such as human resources and legal counsel. So internet abuse investigations can often involve several sources of evidence. We might examine the suspect's computer, browser information, URLs, network logs, and proxy server logs. The important idea is correlation. Instead of relying on one piece of evidence, we compare information from different sources. We want to build a clear picture of what occurred. Investigators also need to understand any applicable privacy laws that may be applied. So the following steps here are going to outline the recommended procedures for email investigations. These may involve spam, inappropriate messages, harassment, and threats. So we look at for evidence depends on how the email system works. These messages may be stored on a local computer, a company email server, or web-based service. Also, the email headers can also contain information that can be useful about a message. Now, attorney-client privilege investigations require a special confidentiality. The attorney directing the investigation controls the scope of the work. So the investigators may receive specific keywords to search for and create multiple forensic images for verification. The main concept here is that certain investigations have additional procedure and confidential requirements. You will need to know these requirements before beginning the exam. We see some more steps here for conducting an attorney-client privilege investigation. Once again, it's going to depend on the scope of the investigation. Now, industrial espionage involves theft or attempted theft of sensitive or proprietary company information. Now, these cases can become extremely serious. Investigators may need to gather network logs, email records, surveillance information, or other evidence while regularly communicating with management and corporate attorneys. Suspected industrial espionage should be handled very carefully because it may become a criminal matter. So, an interview is generally used to collect information from a witness or suspect, where an interrogation is the process of trying to get a suspect to confess. So, digital investigators, they may help determine which questions should be asked based on what has already been discovered in the evidence. Investigators should be patient throughout the session, ask appropriate follow-up questions, and make sure they understand the facts that they're trying to establish. So, a forensic workstation is a computer specifically configured for digital forensic work. Um, it may be something that's loaded with additional bays and forensic software. One extremely important tool is a rot blocker. This helps prevent forensic computers from writing information back to the evidence drive. Now, there are going to be hardware rot blockers as well as software rot blockers. So, you want to remember our goal. We don't want our investigation to change the evidence we are investigating. Now, forensic workstations need the acquisition software, analysis software, storage for forensic images, and connections for different types of devices. Rot blocker, as we just discussed, is also a basic requirement. Any additional equipment may depend on what types of devices you're likely investigating. We'll see some additional useful items here that would be maybe needed. So the bigger idea of forensic workstations should be prepared to safely acquire and analyze evidence from different types of storage media. Now, before beginning an examination, gather everything identified in your investigation plan. You see this include the original storage media, the evidence custody form, evidence container from the storage media, bitstream imaging tool, forensic workstation to copy and examine your evidence, and also that securable evidence locker, cabinet, or safe. You don't want to go halfway through your collecting the evidence and discover you're missing something important. So before you start, gather your resources you need. So when the evidence is collected, you want to document it immediately. You want to complete the appropriate evidence form, have the necessary people sign off on them, place the evidence in the proper container, transport it securely, and update the custody documentation. Then you want to secure the evidence. The key word here is throughout this process is documentation. You want to document everything that you do step by step. Now, a bitstream copy is a bit by bit copy of the original storage media. This is something that's different from a normal backup. So, a normal backup may copy the known files but miss deleted information. and file fragments, where the forensic image attempts to preserve that data needed for the forensic examination. Now, one of the fundamental rules of digital forensics is you want to preserve the original and perform your analysis on a copy whenever possible. When you're analyzing digital evidence, your job is to recover the data. So deleting a file doesn't necessarily immediately erase the actual data. So it's going to linger on that disk until new data is saved in the same physical location. So when you delete a file, all it's telling your hard drive, your operating system is telling your hard drive that that space is available to write to. So that's going to stay on there until something else overwrites that location. Forensic tools such as autopsy can help investigators locate and recover deleted information. So we're going to look at more of these concepts as we move throughout the course. So this slide here is going to show the hexadecimal view in autopsy. So at this level, we're looking more directly at the underlying data. Now, keep in mind, you don't need to understand this yet. Purpose showing this is how to demonstrate that forensic tools allow us to examine data at different levels instead of simply looking at normal files and folders. So eventually, the investigation has to become a report. The report should explain what you did and what you found, which goes back to the step-by-step of documentation. Another important concept is repeatable findings. So it means you must be able to repeat the steps and produce the same results. Another qualified investigator should also be able to follow those procedures and produce the same results. Once again, this is why documentation is so important. So we see the autopsy and other forensic tools can help generate these reports. These reports can document the evidence and finding that's been produced through the examination. Now, this software helps organize the information, but remember the investigators are still responsible for explaining what the evidence means. Tool does not make that final conclusion for you. So after an investigation is complete, you want to review your work. You can ask yourself, what could you have done better? Was your documentation complete? Did anything unexpected happen? Did you discover a better technique? Did you encounter a problem that you need to prepare for next time? So critiquing a case isn't about assigning blame. It's about improving the investigative process. All right, so now that we've finished through chapter 1, you should be able to describe the field of digital forensics, explain how to prepare computer investigations, and summarize the difference between public sector and private sector investigations. Just keep in mind, remember, digital forensics, it's not simply about recovering the data. It's a structured investigation process. We have to understand what we're investigating, how to collect the evidence properly, preserve that evidence, document the chain of custody, analyze forensic copies, and report our findings. We also have to explain requirements for data recovery workstations and software. We have to understand that different investigations have different rules, how a criminal investigation may operate differently from internal company investigations. But from this chapter, remember these 3 ideas from this chapter. You want to preserve the evidence, document what you do, and follow a systematic process. These 3 ideas are going to continue throughout the rest of the course.